Hi there, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me. It's tropical houseplants. And today is going to be a continuation of the plant review series. And in today's review, I will be talking about a plant and I will put a picture of it here and I will explain why I don't have it in front of me throughout this video. But it is for the Philodendron Prince of Orange. And straight off the bat, this is definitely a plant that if you can find it around this time of the year, and it's not just for this time of the year, and I will say this is the time of the year that most people will buy this, those very, very orange leaves, it just really do give kind of fall vibes and pumpkin spice lattes. That's a cultural thing for me because I'm not from a country that really does Halloween or pumpkin and things like this. So it's kind of something I had to come to terms with over the years, especially living over here. But yeah, it's going to be about the Philodendron Prince of Orange. And as always, if you're returning back for this review series, welcome back. Nice to have you again. You know that I will have the chapters down below, so if you want to skip to your favorite bit, please do. And if you're just joining and you're new, welcome to the slight insanity that is this review series, when I just ramble on about whether or not I like or dislike a plant. But ultimately, I will say the same thing I always say, these reviews, there's no way of it not being biased. It will be biased to my experiences with my plants in my conditions. In my conditions being that I'm in a conservatory in the UK and whatever that might entail in terms of light levels, humidity levels, grey skies and rain, and cold in the winter now. It's such fun. But yeah, I do encourage you, if you've got this plant yourself and you've had good successes with this and you want to share your own review on this plant, do drop it in the comments down below. This is getting really quite, I'm loving how much you're all commenting down below and sharing your experiences, because essentially it is turning into what me and, from what I'm understanding, possibly a lot of you have been wanting for a while, which is a repository of being able to go and look at it and just kind of go, what have people's actual experiences been growing this plant over a longer period of time, rather than I've just unboxed this, isn't it great? Because most plants are great when you first unbox them, most of the times. But yeah, enough about that. Let's move on swiftly to the first topic. So as I've mentioned, I do not have this plant in front of me, and so you can see I'm either going to have a photo here or I'm going to have a video. I will put a photo here, hopefully if I've got one still on my plant care app, of when I first got this plant, which wasn't particularly large. It wasn't a baby. I know that some of these came out as babies, the Philodendron Prince of Oranges. But the reason why it's not here right now is right behind a shelf there, and it is fully leaning on the shelf and it's stuck to the window, and that plant has not moved for a year and a half. And it probably won't. I know, actually, I lie. I did move it almost a year ago to move it into pond because the soil was drying out too much and I wanted to have a reservoir ready for it in the summer, and it did beautifully. It nearly snapped itself off, and you might be able to see when I insert some of the clips of kind of how it's leaning and the support sticks, and one support stick that's kind of fully pulled out of the pond. It's been a journey, basically. So kind of early warning on this one, there's going to be some interesting clips coming in, mainly me going through other plants and through my kind of plant shelves in order to take photos or videos of this plant so you can see them throughout this video, and also from the outside. So apologies if some of the videos that are from the outside looking in have got glare. Do not judge my very, very dirty windows. I did clean them, believe it or not, about a week or two ago on the outside, but it has rained quite solidly, so they are filthy again. So, you know, it is what it is. But coming into the background of how I got this plant, I wanted it for a while. I've had this plant for at least 3 or 4 years. And again, the title will have how long I've had this plant for. And I wanted it for a long period of time. This time of the year, as I mentioned earlier on, is the time of the year where you cannot find it as easily because a lot more people are going to go, oh, it's orange, it's fall colors, it's pumpkin colors, let's get it in October specifically. So I don't know why I'm bringing out this video now. If people want to get it, but it might be better to... Anyway, hopefully you'll see this at a point in time where you can find them a bit more easily. And I will kind of give a bit of a spoiler. These have become easier to find, but we'll touch on that on availability. But yeah, I wasn't able to find it for a long period of time. I did find it in a local plant store, which became one of my kind of diehard plant stores. After that purchase, ironically enough, I think that was the first plant I ever got from them. And yeah, I kind of found it at a good price. I kind of put feelers out. This is how difficult it was to find. I'd put feelers out and they had to tell me that they found it. But again, I'll touch a bit more on that on the availability side of things. I've had this pretty much on all 3 properties that I've lived in the last 5 years, and it's done well in every single condition. So adaptable is another thing that I will say about this plant. But yeah, I mean, overall, so far so good, essentially. But yeah, let's move into the next topic. Speed of growth with this one. Now, this is an interesting one because of the way that the leaves come out, and they come out this bright, bright orange color. And depending on the video, don't come at me and say it's this philodendron because it's a red philodendron, because I think there's a philodendron cherry red now. I think there's a Raising Sun one that's slightly on the redder side. 100% this is a Prince of Orange from when I got it. Most of these other cultivars with colors in them didn't really exist at that point. So I'd be really surprised if I ended up getting one of those when people weren't even aware and they possibly weren't even in circulation yet. But it is one that can have different shades and different hues of orange as well. And I think when that leaf comes in that orange color, that because it happens on the new leaf and then it will fade down into green, I'm not going to lie, it goes through some muddy brownie phases as well. So that might not be for everybody, but again, fall colors. This plant can be a bit slow when it's quite young. So, and I will say that I bought like a Red Sun or something like that, the red one of the ready ones that were growing as a baby plant. It didn't do too well, but it might have been my conditions. I moved it into pond maybe a bit too quickly. I gave it some grow lights, possibly wasn't too bright, or maybe it was a bit too bright. I don't know, but that one didn't survive really. But this one, it was slow to grow and to get going at least, and I didn't get it as a baby plant, as I said, but when it finally established itself, it was just a very stable plant for me, consistent. Is it the fastest, even now that it's a lot larger, is it the fastest philodendron that I own? Probably not. In the summer, if a golden pothos will bring out 2 or 3 leaves in here per month, this one might bring out 1 or 2 leaves. And again, it got faster at some point. It's now slowing back down again because it's got those large paddly leaves and they are quite sizable now. So it does take a lot of energy for the plant to pump out those leaves. Kind of on top of that, the fact that I moved it into ponds, so my watering would be easier. And generally when I get large plants into pond, they take a beat to get used to it. And also it slows down their rate of growth when they're quite so large. So that might be another thing as well. So, but generally speaking, a decent grower. Moving on to ease of propagation with this one, and it does have quite close internodal spacing. Again, depending on how much light you give it, it might then stretch and etiolate, so you might be able to get an easier, something like a very sharp knife, ideally one that isn't serrated because that will cause too much damage on the actual growing stem. Will be fine, and I've grown this in perlite, I've grown it in soil, I've grown it in damp sphagnum moss, I've kind of propagated it in a prop box, I've done it outside of a prop box, it was fine. So, and I've also grown this plant in regular household humidity in a place in the house, in the previous house, that was getting really diffuse it probably wouldn't even be bright and direct light. It might be diffuse medium light, and it still did okay. It didn't live its best life at that point. It also had regular household humidity. It wasn't anywhere near a radiator, so it was probably on one of the colder bits of the house. It was fine. So a relatively easy philodendron to propagate. At least it has been in my experience. If yours differs, do let us know down below. Moving on to availability on this one, and I kind of teased a bit in the beginning just to give you some background of how it was when I first got it. So it wasn't that easy to come by in the UK and Europe again at that point. Maybe in Europe, it wasn't easy to find in the UK, but this was a good few years ago before there was a point with this plant as well where it kind of boomed in popularity. It never got massively expensive, but there was a lot more people that were aware of it, and there was a lot more of it that came on the market, which for me, I would assume a lot of that, at least here in the UK, and I would imagine Europe, would have come over from growers from the Netherlands. So that's probably kind of one bit of a hint there. But imagine when I first got this plant, I was actually talking to some plant stores that had more of the rare plants or the more uncommon ones to come by, not the very, very difficult plants. So I'm talking 3 or 4 years ago, if you were looking for an Anthurium warocqueanum, it was nigh to impossible to find it over here. There was only a select few people that would be selling them. You'd have to, for instance, buy directly from Ecuador or the Far East. So this wasn't quite at that level, but it wasn't one that was easily available over here. I have a very sneaky suspicion that in the States, in the US, this might have been a bit more readily available even back then, because I heard of this plant by watching other YouTubers, ironically enough, who were based in the States and possibly Canada as well at that point. I know Canada sometimes doesn't always get plants at the same rate that the US does, but yeah, and it was very, very difficult. And I had to go and talk to these resellers or retailers and just kind of say, the one that I got it from in the end, I actually had to go and say, look, I'm really looking for this plant. If you come across this, and I think they did come across it in a nursery in the Netherlands when they went over to find some of their own stock for the shop. And I got a message from them saying, look, we found it. This is the plant. This is the price. It's not cheap. So it was kind of high double digits at that point, but it was a relatively large plant at that point, and I hadn't seen one come across my kind of sight anytime recently. So I'm just like, yeah, okay. Probably a bit more than I would have wanted to pay at that point, but it was very, very exciting. I do have a very sneaky suspicion that my plant might have been used as a bit of a more immature mother plant for future iterations of baby Philodendron Prince of Oranges that came on the market, which is kind of cool, I think. But yeah, the plant then came over. I went purchased it. I don't think it got much more expensive than maybe what I paid for it, so on the high double digits. And it's definitely come down in price. If I'm not mistaken, you can get this. I've seen this in some garden centers. I've definitely seen it in some plant stores. I've definitely seen it online. I've definitely seen an awful lot of the baby versions of this plant. Have I seen so many of the established bigger plants? Probably not so much recently. When they first started coming on the market, I was seeing the slightly bigger plants. But yeah, it's a bit more available. And I think at the moment you're looking at kind of low double digits, possibly single digits, high single digits for a baby plant like this now. So it's become a lot more readily available, and I could not be happier. I do really think that this is a plant that everybody should own. Whether or not everybody would want to own this plant is different, but one of my favorite colors is either neon green, and you've probably seen me wear a lot of neon green at some point or another on this channel, or orange. And again, you've probably seen me wear a lot of orange on this channel at some point or another. So for me, it was a no-brainer. It's like, oh, it's green and it's orange. Perfect. But yeah, I think that's what I wanted to say about availability. Let's move on to the next topic. So moving on to pests with this plant, and surprisingly, not an awful lot. I think I may have had spider mites once on this plant, and I'm trying to remember, I think I put on some of the predatory mites at some point, and that's the only reason why I remember it. It wasn't a heavy infestation. I'm looking at it now, it's maybe got a mealybug on it in a condition where a lot of my plants do have mealybugs in one way or another in this conservatory. And I will state this because I keep saying about mealybugs at this particular moment in time. I've kept on top of it, so at any given time, one or another of my plants might have a mealybug or two mealybugs. We're not talking about a huge infestation. It's just annoying to me because it's pretty much on everything now, and it's very difficult to get rid of at this point. But manageable, manageable. I mean, the way that I look at it a lot of the times is these plants in nature might have some of these pests growing naturally. Yes, there'll be predators, and a lot of the times, if I really have a heavy infestation of whatever, and it's still not struggling, I will move it out in the summer and let nature do its thing. And there's other predator insects that will pretty much decimate whatever pests I've got on the plant. I just need to remember to check it for different types of pests, like slugs, when I bring it back in the winter. So yeah, and yes, I will kind of say now that even with all of that, I still occasionally get slugs in here, usually in springtime. That's fun. but yeah, with this plant, spider mites, occasional mealybug. Have I ever had thrips on this? I don't think I have. Those are the big pests that I've usually ever experienced. Like the touchwood, I've never experienced scale or anything like that, so I've not had that. I'm trying to think. When I have whitefly now, does it go onto it? Probably not. So generally not a bad plant when it comes to pests. So moving on to accessories and kind of my tips on growing this plant. As I mentioned earlier on, I did have it in a light, airy, aroid soil mix. Did really well. Had it in a net pot. That did really well. I think that was the last pot I had it in. I had it in terracotta. Did really well. I had it in plastic. Did really well. Have since moved it as a large plant, and it was a calculated risk that I was prepared to maybe lose this plant. I wouldn't have been happy to lose it, but I was prepared to lose this plant because I generally don't like to move established large plants into pond if they've been in soil or some form of soil mix for a while. But it did well with that. It took to it relatively well. I did not start using the reservoir straight away. I did my transition into pond, as I've kind of mentioned in the video that I'll link at the top there. So that was a better way of doing it. And it did work. And support sticks, yes, purely for the way that mine was growing. As I mentioned, this is more of a rosette type philodendron, so it won't necessarily climb. And you should be able to see, and hopefully I'll have videos that I'm putting over this bit at the moment, but you'll see that it's starting to kind of lean and almost turn into a bit of a crawler. So I needed the support sticks to kind of keep it a bit more upright so it doesn't kind of go horizontal and drop off. And it gets very heavy. There's a lot of plant material on this plant when it gets to that size. So unlike a gloriosum that might be behind me here, where even if the stem is quite thick, the petioles are quite thin and the leaves can be quite thin as well. This is just a chunky boy, basically. So it's something that I've kind of put on there more so to kind of keep it in the pot so it doesn't kind of throw itself off a shelf, essentially. I don't think it's necessarily needed. But yeah, I think that's the big thing. Fertilize as I would with any of my other plants and just kind of let it do its own thing, really. This is a non-fussy plant, at least it has been in my experience. I have a very sneaky suspicion that it might not be for everybody, that it might have not been this easy for everybody. So if you've had different experiences, do drop it down below. I would be very, very keen to read what the struggles may have been with this plant. I'm just really curious. But yeah, overall, relatively straightforward in terms of accessories. And coming into final thoughts for this one, and I will start it off as I usually do, which is, if I didn't have this plant, knowing what I know now, would I purchase this plant? Yes, probably I would. And I say probably, it's not a definite, it's only because I still really enjoy this plant. I would definitely purchase it now at the lower prices. I think I might have paid a bit too much for how interesting this plant is, for me at least, even if it does have the oranges and all these things. And it is getting better now when it's older, and hopefully the clips that I've been adding in, you'll be able to see that it's not just the one leaf, the one new leaf that has got the coloration. Now I'm getting a lot more leaves coming in at the same time, and they've all got the coloration, which does make it a bit more interesting. It's a shame for me that I've got it where I've got it and I can't see it as often as I would probably like to see it. That is the reason for me that it's not definitely would buy this plant again. It's because when it gets sizable, this is kind of more of a showpiece plant. So if I didn't have a huge collection and I wanted to only have a few plants and it was mainly for decorative reasons in the house and all these things, this would be perfect because I think it's a good conversation starter, people looking at it, because the orange that comes in, it doesn't look that the leaf is dying off. It does actually look like it's on purpose, which is kind of cool. And it's really amenable and all of these things. So yeah, overall, yes, I would definitely get this plant again. Not definitely, but I would get this plant again. And then coming into the scores from 0, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best, my overall score for this plant would probably be a strong 7, I'd say. It's an easygoing plant. It doesn't need an awful lot of hassle. It can propagate relatively easily. It can withstand a lot of different conditions in a household environment. It is still interesting years later, at least it is for me. Again, I think some people might fall out of love with this at some point because it's kind of a bit more of a one-trick pony. It's kind of a very simple rosette type paddle leaf philodendron that has got a colourful leaf that comes in once and then goes away to green again. And sometimes you might have all green leaves until the new leaf comes out. Yes. But as an actual plant to care for, it's a solid 7. Like, it's the only reason why I'm taking points off from it being a 10 is because I think it's a bit more of a one-trick pony. But as a whole, caring for it has been really easy, and it does size up quite nicely. It does take a while, but it does size up really, really nicely. But yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to say for this video. Hopefully you found it informative. I'm really sorry that some of these videos now are going to have more pictures and videos interlaced in rather than me actually holding the plant. But we're getting to the points of my collection now that the plants I want to start reviewing are in very awkward places. And if I can get them out, to bring them out to show you on the camera, I will. If not, the best solution I can come up with is actually take videos and interlace them through the video and pictures just so you can see what I'm talking about, essentially. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.